The CEO who married his assistant just for a deal but ended up falling in love with her. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The rain was relentless that night, drumming against the glass walls of Hale Tower, the tallest building in Chicago. Inside, under the cold white lights of the top floor, Alexander Hale stood behind his desk, tall, composed, a man whose eyes rarely revealed anything. The glow from the skyline outlined his sharp jaw and the cufflinks that bore his family crest. Across from him sat Emily Carter, his assistant for the past 2 years. She clutched a folder, her heart pounding as she tried to read his expression. He had summoned her after hours, and everyone knew Alexander Hale did not waste words. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but unnervingly direct. "Marry me," he said, sliding a document across the glass table. Emily blinked, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, what did you just say?" Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice even. "I need a wife. Temporarily. For 6 months. It is a contractual arrangement, nothing more." He tapped the folder. "All terms are detailed here." Emily's pulse raced as she opened the file. Inside was an actual marriage contract. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered. "You are my boss. And I am offering you $500,000, Alexander replied without hesitation. "You will live in my penthouse, attend a few public events, and pretend to be Mrs. Hale until the board signs the merger. After that, the contract ends, and you walk away with the money and your freedom." The words felt unreal. Emily was drowning in medical bills and about to lose her late father's small apartment. She had been working 3 jobs just to stay afloat. Now, the man who terrified half of Wall Street was offering her a solution wrapped in something that looked dangerously like a trap. "Why me?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, his eyes dark but unreadable. "Because I can trust you to follow rules. You do not gossip, you do not flirt, and you do not care about the spotlight." "That is exactly what I need." The rain outside thundered louder, as if echoing the chaos inside her mind. Emily looked at the line where her name was printed beside his, a space waiting for her signature. She swallowed hard. "And what happens if I say no?" Alexander stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket. "Then I will find someone else. But I thought you were practical enough to know what this could mean for you." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She needed this. Still, her pride hesitated. "You do not even believe in love, do you?" she said quietly. Alexander's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Love is a distraction. Deals last longer." He turned away, leaving her staring at the contract that could change everything. Emily's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She could hear her mother's hospital monitor in her memory, see the overdue rent notice on her counter. Finally, she whispered, "All right, Mr. Hale. I will marry you." He looked back, a flicker of something relief, maybe curiosity crossing his face before it vanished. "Good. The wedding is in 48 hours. My driver will pick you up tomorrow morning for the fitting." He extended his hand. Emily shook it, her fingers cold against his. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale." The sound of it sent a chill down her spine. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she exhaled shakily, unaware that this deal, meant to save them both, would soon test every rule they had written. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the tallest tower in Chicago, a contract had just rewritten 2 lives forever. The morning after signing the contract, Emily woke up in disbelief. Her phone still showed the text from Alexander's assistant confirming the appointment for her dress fitting. The reality of what she had agreed to sank in with the weight of a stone. She was going to marry her boss. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked like a stranger's, pale, tired, terrified. By noon, a sleek black car waited outside her apartment. The driver greeted her by name and opened the door in silence. The ride through downtown Chicago felt unreal. The city bustled with life, but inside the car, everything was still. When they reached the designer boutique, Emily hesitated before stepping inside. The place smelled like white roses and money. Every mirror gleamed, and the sales assistants moved with rehearsed smiles. Then she saw him. Alexander stood near a rack of tailored suits, speaking to the manager with his usual quiet authority. He turned as if he could sense her presence. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, she forgot to breathe. He was immaculate, composed, and impossibly calm. "You are late," he said, glancing at his watch. Emily bit her lip. "Traffic," she murmured. He nodded once, then gestured to the stylist. "Let us make this efficient. The ceremony is private, but it will be photographed. She needs something that says elegance, not extravagance." His tone was businesslike, as if he were approving a new project. As they fitted her, Emily stood on the platform while a seamstress pinned the hem of the ivory dress. She caught her reflection beside Alexander's dark silhouette and realized how starkly different they looked. Worlds apart. "Do you ever smile, Mr. Hale?" she asked without thinking. His brows lifted slightly. "Not when there is work to do." "Even on your wedding day?" she challenged. For a second, something softened in his face, almost a smile, almost. "We are not having a real wedding, Miss Carter," he said quietly. "Remember that." She nodded, even as her chest ached at the reminder. 2 days later, the ceremony took place in the private hall of Hale Tower. Only a notary, 2 witnesses, and Alexander's lawyer were present. The exchange of vows lasted less than 10 minutes. There were no flowers, no guests, no music, just the echo of the rain tapping against the windows again, as if repeating their first night. When it was done, Alexander extended his hand formally. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale." Emily shook it, her fingers trembling. A flash from the photographer captured the moment, sealing it in time. Afterward, she was escorted to the penthouse, her new home. The elevator doors opened to a world she had never imagined: marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, art worth more than her entire life savings. Alexander's voice broke her daze. "The guest room is on the right. The staff will provide your schedule. We will have breakfast together at 8 to maintain appearances. Beyond that, your time is your own." He turned to leave. Emily stared after him, speechless. "Wait," she called. He paused at the doorway. "Why me, really?" He looked over his shoulder, his eyes unreadable. "Because you do not want anything from me. That makes you the safest choice." With that, he disappeared into his office, the door clicking shut behind him. Emily stood alone in the vast, silent penthouse, the city glittering below like 1,000 secrets. For the first time, she wondered if the real danger was not in the deal itself but in the feelings that might come after. Outside, thunder rolled again, and the clock struck midnight on the first night of their marriage in name only. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, spilling over marble floors and cold silver furniture. Emily woke up to the quiet hum of the city below and the faint aroma of fresh coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was until she saw the ivory dress folded neatly on the chair and the diamond band glinting on her hand. It was not a dream. She was Mrs. Hale now, at least on paper. When she walked into the dining room, Alexander was already seated at the table, reading something on his tablet. He looked perfectly composed, every movement deliberate. The staff moved like shadows around him, silent and efficient. "Good morning," Emily greeted, forcing a polite smile. Alexander looked up briefly. "Morning. Sit. You will need your strength. We have an event this evening." "Already?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "You said we would stay quiet for a while." He set his tablet down. The board dinner was moved up. They want to meet my wife. The words landed heavily. She had no training for this, no idea how to behave among millionaires who dined on deals and power. Alexander must have read the panic in her eyes because he added, "Relax. You will not have to speak much. Just stay beside me, smile when I look at you, and try not to drop anything." His tone was dry, almost teasing, but his face did not soften. That afternoon, a stylist team arrived with racks of gowns and trays of jewelry. They worked around her like she was a mannequin, pinning, adjusting, curling her hair until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. When she finally stepped out, Alexander was waiting near the elevator in a black tuxedo. He glanced at her once, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes before he masked it. "You clean up well," he said simply. Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. "And you still sound like my boss." "Habit," he replied. The ride to the Hale Corporation headquarters was silent. At the gala, the room glowed with crystal chandeliers and murmured conversation. The city's elite mingled in tailored perfection. Cameras flashed as Alexander entered with Emily on his arm. Whispers followed, people recognizing her. The assistant suddenly turned wife. Emily felt their eyes like sharp blades. She steadied her breathing, just as he had instructed. At the head table, a woman with scarlet lipstick leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, we have heard so much about you," she said with a practiced smile. Emily forced her own. "That must have been a short story," she answered softly, earning a few polite laughs. Alexander's hand brushed her arm briefly, a small gesture, but enough to tell her she had done well. As dinner continued, he leaned close to her ear. "You handled that perfectly. See? You belong here more than you think." His breath was warm against her skin, and for one reckless heartbeat, she forgot this was a performance. Later that night, after hours of smiling and pretending, she finally removed her heels and sighed. Alexander loosened his tie, looking at her with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "You survived your first board event," he said. "Barely," she replied, rubbing her feet. He handed her a glass of water. "You will get used to it. Appearances are everything in this world." "And what about truth?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then looked away. "Truth does not pay dividends." For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the city. Emily studied him, the perfect suit, the perfect control, and yet there was something weary in his eyes, something human. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who does not believe in love, you hide loneliness very well." His eyes met hers, sharp but unreadable. "Careful, Mrs. Hale," he murmured. "That sounds dangerously close to caring." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe I am just doing my job." He said nothing more. But when he turned away, his reflection in the window showed the faintest trace of a real smile, the first she had ever seen. Outside, the city lights flickered like silent applause for a performance that was starting to feel too real. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt more like a business arrangement than a marriage. Every morning, Emily joined Alexander for breakfast, where their conversation rarely wandered beyond schedules, meetings, and upcoming public appearances. He remained polite but distant, his life divided neatly into categories: work, obligations, and control. Yet, there were small moments that slipped through the cracks. Like the way he lingered when she laughed at something unexpectedly, or how he once adjusted her coat before she stepped into the cold without a word. Those fleeting gestures made the silence between them heavier somehow. One evening, after another long day of pretending to be Mrs. Hale in front of investors, Emily wandered into the penthouse study. She found Alexander standing by the window, staring at the skyline with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His tie was undone, his posture less rigid than usual. For the first time, he looked almost human. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked lightly. He turned toward her, one eyebrow raised. "Do you ever stop asking questions?" "Only when I get answers," she said, walking closer. He sighed and gestured toward the view. "This is what it takes, Emily. Every hour, every choice. You build something worth billions, and you realize it owns you. There is no off switch. His voice carried no pride, only exhaustion. Emily watched him for a moment before saying softly, maybe you just forgot how to turn it off. He looked at her then, really looked, as if the idea startled him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. The next morning, Emily found a note on the dining table written in his precise handwriting, "Be ready by 6. Wear something warm." When the car arrived, she expected another formal event, but instead, Alexander drove them to the edge of Lake Michigan. The air was crisp, the water dark and endless. He carried 2 cups of coffee, handed her one, and nodded toward the horizon. "I used to come here when things got too loud," he said quietly. "My father built an empire, and when he died, everyone expected me to take his place. I never asked for any of this." Emily wrapped her hands around the cup, watching the sunrise spill gold across the water. "You could still choose something else," she said. He shook his head with a small, rueful smile. "It is too late for that." She turned to him. "You sound like a man twice your age." He chuckled under his breath, the sound low and unfamiliar. "Maybe you make me forget for a minute." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. For the first time, Alexander's armor cracked. He told her about his late nights, his fear of losing control, the loneliness hidden behind success. Emily listened, offering no judgment, only silence and presence. When he finally stopped, he looked at her and said, "You are very different from the world I live in." "That is probably why you hired me," she replied. "No, Mrs. Hale," he said softly. "That is probably why I cannot stop thinking about you." The confession caught her off guard. Her heart stumbled, her breath shallow. "This was not part of the deal," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. Neither was happiness. The car ride home was quiet, but the silence felt charged, no longer cold. That night, Emily could not sleep. She stood by her window, staring at the glittering city below. Somewhere in the reflection, she saw herself not as his employee, not as the woman pretending to be his wife, but as someone standing dangerously close to believing in something real. And in the room across the hall, Alexander sat at his desk, staring at the same skyline, wondering when pretending had started to feel like the truth. Outside, the city breathed, unaware that somewhere above it, 2 people bound by a contract had just taken their first step toward breaking every rule they had written. The days turned into weeks, and the line between acting and feeling began to blur. Emily kept reminding herself that this was a temporary arrangement, but every morning she found it harder to keep her emotions locked behind the same walls Alexander had built around his own heart. Their routine changed subtly. He started joining her in the kitchen instead of waiting for breakfast to be served, pouring his own coffee, asking about her sleep, her day. One evening, after a particularly long board meeting, he returned home looking more worn out than usual. She found him sitting in the dark study, his tie loose, his jaw tight. Without thinking, she brought him a cup of tea. "You should not sit in the dark like that," she said gently. "You will ruin your eyes." He glanced up, startled. "Old habits die hard. I used to watch my father do this when he was thinking about something he could not fix." Emily set the cup down beside him. "And can you fix it?" "Not this time," he said. "One of our biggest investors is threatening to withdraw. It could jeopardize everything I have built." She hesitated, then asked softly, "What if you stop trying to fix everything alone?" He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for an answer he did not want to admit he needed. "I do not know how," he whispered. That confession did something to her. She reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. For a moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he covered her hand with his grip steady but tender. It was the first time they had touched without pretense. The next day, Alexander surprised her. He asked her to accompany him to a charity gala his company sponsored each year. Emily hesitated, remembering the stares and whispers from the last event, but he reassured her. This time, you are not pretending to belong. You already do. His words stayed with her. That evening, as she stepped out in a simple midnight blue gown, she felt something shift inside her. When Alexander saw her, he froze for half a second before composing himself. You look stunning, he said quietly. Thank you, she replied, blushing despite herself. At the gala, the lights shimmered across glass and gold, and music flowed softly through the air. The evening was going smoothly until a man approached them, a Sharpie board member named Richard Lane. His smile was thin. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, he greeted. I must admit, this marriage of yours was unexpected. How convenient that it happened right before the merger vote. Alexander's posture stiffened. Careful, Richard, he said evenly. You are suggesting something dangerous. Richard shrugged. Just observing patterns. People talk, you know. Emily felt heat rise in her chest, but before she could respond, Alexander placed a hand at the small of her back. His voice turned calm but cold. Then let them talk. They always do, until results silence them. He led her away, but she could feel his tension. Later, as the night wound down, Emily found him outside on the balcony, staring at the city lights again. You handled that well, she said softly. You did too, he replied. But you should not have to face that. She shook her head. You did not face it alone tonight. He turned toward her then, the wind stirring his hair, the city glowing behind him. You are making this very difficult, he said quietly. What? Being human, she teased gently. His lips twitched. No. Pretending. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then stopped himself. If I cross this line, it changes everything, he murmured. Emily met his gaze steadily. Maybe it already has. The words hung between them, fragile and irrevocable. Neither of them moved, but in that suspended moment, the contract that had started their story no longer felt like a key, it felt like a fuse, burning quietly toward something neither of them could control. Inside, music drifted faintly through the open doors, but neither of them heard it. For the first time since their agreement began, it was not the deal that bound them together. It was the truth neither could keep pretending to ignore. The night after the gala marked a quiet shift neither of them dared to acknowledge. In the following days, something unspoken grew between the man, awareness that made every glance linger, every silence feel charged. Emily tried to convince herself it was still just part of the contract, but the way Alexander looked at her now said otherwise. The distance he had once maintained began to blur. He started joining her in the evenings, asking about her favorite books, her childhood, even what she missed most about her old life. For the first time, he listened. One evening, she found him sitting by the grand piano in the corner of the penthouse, something she had never seen him touch before. His fingers brushed the keys softly, hesitant, almost vulnerable. I did not know you played, she said, stepping closer. He gave a faint smile. I used to. My mother taught me when I was a boy. I stopped after she passed. Emily hesitated, then asked, why? Because she was the only person who ever made it feel like music instead of pressure, he said quietly. The sadness in his voice was unlike anything she had heard from him before. Without thinking, she sat beside him and pressed a single key. The soft note filled the air. Maybe you should play for her again, she said. He looked at her, something flickering behind his calm exterior. Maybe I just did. The moment stretched, delicate and real. But before it could turn into something more, his phone buzzed sharply against the piano. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. It is the board, he said, standing abruptly. They moved the merger meeting up to Friday. The warmth vanished, replaced by the chill of business. Emily watched as he paced, his voice clipped and focused. It was like watching a wall rebuild itself right in front of her eyes. That night, she could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling, wondering why it hurt to be shut out of a world that was never hers to begin with. The next morning, she made breakfast, something she had never done since living there. Alexander walked in, surprised to see her cooking. "What is this?" he asked. "A peace offering," she said with a small smile. "You look like you have not slept in days. Eat something before you try to save the world again." For the first time in days, he laughed. It was quiet, but genuine. "You are impossible," he said, sitting down. "You need someone to remind you that you are human," she replied softly. He met her eyes and nodded slowly. "You do that better than anyone." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and headlines. The merger was critical, and the press followed every move Alexander made. Emily stayed in the background as always, but one evening, she overheard two executives whispering in the lobby. "I heard Lane is planning to expose the marriage," one said. "He has documents proving it is just a contract." The words sent a chill through her. If the truth came out, it would destroy Alexander's reputation and the company's credibility. She rushed upstairs and found him in his office. "Alexander, we have a problem," she said breathlessly, explaining what she had heard. He was silent for a moment, then exhaled sharply. "I knew Lane would try something like this. He has been circling for weeks." "What will you do?" she asked. He looked up at her, his eyes steady but tired. "What I always do. Control the narrative before it controls me." But she could see the fear behind his composure, the fear of losing everything he had built. Without thinking, Emily took his hand. "You are not alone in this," she said firmly. He looked at her hand in his, the simplest gesture breaking through all his defenses. "You should not have to be," he said softly. The air between them shifted again, thick with the weight of everything they had not said. For the first time, Alexander Hale, the man who had built an empire on logic and power, felt something he could not quantify or manage. And as Emily stood beside him, he realized the merger was no longer the only thing on the line. Somewhere between business and make-believe, the deal had turned into something dangerously real. Outside, the city lights burned bright, unaware that two signatures on a fake marriage contract had already begun to rewrite the meaning of love, loyalty, and truth. The morning of the merger meeting arrived with an unease that settled over the entire tower like a storm about to break. Reporters swarmed the lobby, flashes from cameras slicing through the cold air as Alexander and Emily stepped out of the elevator together. His hand rested lightly on her back, the gesture protective but composed. To the world, they were the perfect couple, the symbol of stability that investors wanted to see. But beneath the surface, both knew how fragile it all was. Inside the boardroom, tension buzzed like electricity. Richard Lane sat across the table, his smile thin and sharp. As the meeting began, Alexander spoke with confidence, presenting figures, projections, and plans that could secure the company's future. Emily watched from the side, heart pounding. Then, halfway through the presentation, Richard stood. "Before we move forward," he said loudly, "I have a matter to address. It concerns Mr. Hale's personal integrity." The room fell silent. Richard held up a file. "Several sources have confirmed that this marriage is nothing more than a business transaction, a publicity stunt designed to manipulate investor trust. I have documents that prove it." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily froze, the words slicing through her like glass. Alexander's jaw clenched. He rose slowly, every inch the man who commanded empires. "You are out of line," he said evenly. "Am I?" Richard challenged. "Then explain this. Your assistant turned wife, the timing of your ceremony, the sudden spike in company shares after the announcement. Convenient, is it not?" The cameras clicked. Every eye in the room turned to Alexander. Emily could see the weight of years of discipline pressing against his composure. For a heartbeat, she thought he would deny it, but then he did something no one expected. He looked directly at the board and said, "He is right." A shocked murmur filled the air. Emily's breath caught. Alexander continued, his voice steady. This marriage began as a contract. I did it to protect this company, to preserve what my team built. But it did not stay that way. His gaze shifted to Emily, soft but unwavering. Somewhere along the way, I forgot it was an act. The room went still. Even Richard seemed at a loss for words. You want truth? Alexander said, turning back to the board. There it is. You can fire me if you must, but do not mistake sincerity for scandal. The numbers do not lie, and neither do I. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, pride and fear twisting inside her chest. Cameras flashed, catching the moment the ruthless CEO standing not behind a mask of power, but as a man willing to tell the truth. The meeting adjourned in chaos. Outside, reporters shouted questions, lights blinding. Alexander shielded her with his arm and guided her to the car. The silence between them on the drive back was heavy, but not empty. When they reached the penthouse, he finally spoke. I might have just destroyed everything, he said quietly. Emily turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. No, you did the one thing they never expected. You told the truth. He looked at her then, tired but alive. And what if that truth costs us both everything? She smiled faintly. Then at least it will be real. He reached for her hand, and this time, he did not let go. Somewhere below, the world spun on, already feeding on the headlines. But up in the quiet of Hale Tower, two people who had built their lives on control stood together, facing the wreckage and maybe, finally, the beginning of something real. The fallout was immediate. By morning, headlines blazed across every business outlet. The CEO who admitted his marriage was a contract. Investors panicked, the board convened an emergency meeting, and reporters camped outside Hale Tower. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with silence. Emily watched the news in disbelief, her chest tightening at every flashing headline. Alexander stood by the window, expression unreadable, his phone buzzing non-stop. Finally, he turned it off and said quietly, "It is done. The truth is out." "And now what?" she asked. He looked at her, the weight of everything pressing down on his shoulders. "Now we wait for the consequences." The board suspended his position pending investigation. Overnight, the empire he had built began to crack. Yet, for the first time, he did not look angry. He looked free. That evening, Emily found him sitting alone at the piano again, his fingers motionless on the keys. She walked closer, her voice soft. "You could have denied it, Alexander. You could have saved everything." He shook his head. "If I had, I would have lost the only thing that mattered." She frowned. "The company?" He met her gaze, his eyes tired but clear. "No, you." The words hit her harder than she expected. "You cannot mean that," she whispered. "I can," he said simply. "I started this to protect what I owned. Somewhere along the way, I realized what I wanted could not be bought or signed on paper." She sat beside him, her throat tight. "They will destroy you for this." "Then let them," he said with a quiet resolve. "I would rather lose everything honestly than keep it built on a lie." Emily felt tears rise, and before she could stop them, one slipped down her cheek. Alexander reached up and brushed it away with his thumb, his touch gentle. "Do not cry," he said softly. "This is not the end." "Then what is it?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "The beginning of something real." The next morning, Emily walked into the building alone. Cameras flashed, but she ignored them. Inside the boardroom, she faced the very people who had humiliated Alexander. "If you are going to judge him," she said firmly, "then judge me too. I signed that contract. I agreed to it. But what he did yesterday was not for himself. He told the truth because he believes this company deserves honesty, not manipulation." The room fell silent. Even Richard Lane said nothing. Her voice steadied. "You wanted proof of his integrity. You just got it." When she finished, she walked out before anyone could respond. Hours later, when she returned home, Alexander was waiting by the window. She told him everything, and for a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he whispered, "You did not have to do that." "I know," she said, smiling through tears. "But I wanted to." He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no distance, just truth. Outside, the city buzzed with speculation, but in that quiet penthouse, two people who had once signed a deal finally tore down the last line between what was fake and what was real. The storm had passed, but its aftermath had left something unshakable, the beginning of love that had survived the truth. Months passed, and the chaos that had once surrounded them began to fade like the last echo of a storm. The board had reinstated Alexander after an independent review cleared him of wrongdoing. His honesty, once seen as weakness, had turned into the very thing that saved the company. Investors returned, reporters moved on, and Hale Corporation slowly rebuilt its image, not through manipulation this time, but through transparency. Yet for Alexander, none of that mattered as much as the quiet peace he found beside Emily. They no longer lived like strangers bound by paper. The contract that had started everything now sat folded inside a glass frame on his desk, a relic of a life that felt worlds away. One morning, as sunlight filled the penthouse, Emily stood by the window watering the plants she had brought into the once sterile space. The scent of fresh lilies lingered in the air. Alexander watched her, a faint smile touching his lips. "You know," he said, "I used to think love was the weakest thing a person could believe in." She turned, teasing lightly, "And now?" He stepped closer. "Now I think it is the only thing that ever made me strong." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You are getting better at this whole human thing." "I had a good teacher," he replied. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single key tied with a ribbon. Confused, she looked up. "What is this?" "The deed to the community center we spoke about," he said. "You once told me you wanted a place that helps people find purpose again. I bought the building, but it is yours to run, to name, to shape however you wish." Emily covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. "Alexander, I cannot," he interrupted gently. "You can. You already changed one life. I think you can change more." She hugged him tightly, the kind of embrace that said everything words could not. Later that evening, he led her to the rooftop garden he had quietly restored. Fairy lights glowed above them, the city stretching endlessly below. On a small table sat a document and a velvet box. Emily frowned. "Another contract?" He smiled. "In a way, yes." She opened the folder and saw a single line printed in his familiar handwriting: "No terms. Just forever." When she looked up, Alexander was already on one knee, holding the ring that had once symbolized pretense but now carried truth. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice steady, "we started with signatures and lies, but somewhere along the way, you taught me how to live honestly. So I am asking not as a deal, but as a man who finally understands what love means. Will you marry me for real this time?" Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. He slid the ring onto her finger, and when they kissed, it was not the sealing of a contract but the beginning of a life they had both earned. The city lights shimmered around them, and for the first time, Alexander Hale did not see power or profit when he looked at the world as saw her. The woman who turned a lie into love, and a businessman into a believer.